Okay. Hello. Good afternoon. Hi. I'm going to try not to say the say your name part when it says say your name. My name is Brinna, and I am honored to introduce Trevor McDonald, whose session title is Gender and Queer Communities 101, Building a Foundation for Culturally Humble and Inclusive Care. Trevor McDonald is a transgender man from Manitoba, Canada, who has birthed both his children at home, nursed his first child, and now nurses his second child. In 2011, he began a blog, milkjunkies.net, which is popular with both transgender individuals and healthcare providers looking for information on transgender reproduction and infant feeding. He recently led a University of Ottawa study funded by the Canadian Institutes of Health Research that explored the experiences of trans-masculine individuals with pregnancy, birth, and infant feeding. Trevor is the first openly transgender person to become a La Leche League leader, and he is the author of Where's the Mother? Stories from a Transgender Dad. Okay, and that's the end of that. So welcome, and thank you so much.
I think it's working. Is it working? No, not working? Oh, it went green. How is it now? No? Is it green or camera? It's green. Oh, now it's green. Okay, this is good. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming. It's really nice to see you all here, and it's really exciting to get to be here. And I'm really, really old school, so I'm getting out my piece of paper with notes on it. I know that's really weird. I have no relevant financial relationships to disclose. Oh, I see. I think if I turn my head, then you can't hear me anymore, right? Is it? Okay. So I figure some of you might be wondering a little bit what is the difference between the session that I'm giving today and what I'm doing tomorrow. So I'm going to just describe that quickly for you, and I'm not going to be at all offended if some of you get up and leave and go to some other session that you also really wanted to get to see, because I know it's really super tough to choose. So today is a 101. It's fairly basic. It will be good for people who maybe haven't attended a session before that's focused on LGBTQ issues. Tomorrow's session is a 2-hour workshop, and it's going to get really in-depth and into the nitty-gritty and hands-on. So talking about stuff like we'll look at actual sentences on intake forms and dissect the language and try to figure out how to change the language to make it more welcoming, talking about specific clinical issues as well, like positioning on a post-surgical chest, that sort of thing. So it'll be super specific. And this is a little bit more of an introduction, because I've found at every conference that I go to, people come at different points in their learning journey, and it's difficult to address everybody's questions at the right points that they're at. So that's how we tried to divide it this time, and I hope that that'll work out. You're welcome and encouraged to ask questions at any time that you have questions. And we can stop along the way and have discussion as well, as much as people want to. And even if you have a question that's not directly related to what we're talking about today, please feel free to ask it. Like if you're only here today and you can't come tomorrow and you had a specific question that you wanted to ask, that's totally welcome and encouraged. So today we will define some key terms and concepts that are really important to understanding LGBTQ issues. And we will identify some ways that other communities intersect with LGBTQ communities. And we'll also talk about respectful language when communicating with LGBTQ clients. So this really does seem super basic, but it's incredibly important to talk about is just the definition of sex. What do we mean when we talk about sex? Does anyone want to try taking a stab at defining biological sex? Any takers? No takers? Okay, so when we talk about the term sex, and now I see that the screen has died on me, and I don't know if the tech person is here anymore. I don't think I stepped on anything. I don't know. Okay, sorry about that. So sex is a combination of chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive anatomy. So in our society, we typically tend to think of sex as being just male or female. But given the complexity of that combination of chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive anatomy, sometimes it's not that strict and not that binary. And then when somebody has a more unusual combination of those characteristics, we call that intersex. About 1 in 1,500 or 1 in 2,000 births are babies that can be obviously identified as intersex at birth by looking at them, by a physical examination. But it's really incredibly difficult to come up with a number, as a statistic for intersex births, because there are other types of intersex that we can't really see, and that people may live their whole lives without even realizing that they are intersex. There have been a few famous instances where different organizations have tried to really strictly define what is female and what is male. Sports organizations are a great example of this. In 1988, the hurdler Martinez Patino, she lost her place on the Spanish Olympic team because it was discovered that she had XY chromosomes and also that she had internal testes. But she had never known that before. And she had been raised as a girl and lived her life as a woman, identified as a woman. In 2009, the runner Caster Semenya, who has heard of her? She's incredibly famous, right? Yeah. She was subjected to gender testing in the year 2009. And results of that were not ever published, but people suspected that perhaps she had higher than normal, whatever normal is, higher than normal levels of testosterone in her body. So when we talk about the term sex, it's very difficult to strictly categorize male and female because of this combination of chromosomes, hormones, and reproductive anatomy, and there can be variations. Right. I would love to get the screen working again. Is there anybody who's just a techie person in the room who would like to come and work on this kind of while I talk? Any volunteers? No, they didn't. And I mean, just hitting the key had worked. Oh, now it's there. Okay. Awesome. And that's the next slide. That's really great. Okay. Good. So does anybody know what's happening with it? Did I do something? It just, oh. Okay. So maybe if I just wiggle it once in a while, it'll keep going for us. I don't know. Okay. As I said, the handwritten notes, I am not a techie person. So gender identity refers to how we feel inside, how we identify, like our own sense of masculinity or femininity. And we'll often talk kind of about a spectrum of gender where some people may feel more masculine or slightly masculine, or more feminine, slightly feminine, or maybe somewhere in the middle, non-binary, or even outside of that spectrum entirely. I've included the word two-spirit here, and it's important to talk about that word, but it doesn't exactly correspond to LGBT. The term Two-Spirit is an umbrella term that came into use in about 1990, and it's used by some Aboriginal people in North America, but it's used really in a context of spirituality and of ceremony. So me being not Aboriginal, I'm not going to say a whole lot more about it, but just that it's a preferred term by some Aboriginal people, and it's related to LGBT, but doesn't correspond exactly. And then there are endless terms that people use to self-identify, and I can't even list them all here because there are so many, but some people prefer the term genderqueer to describe their gender identity, and also the word agender is coming into use as well now, and I think it's always best to ask an individual which term they prefer to use. Are there any questions so far? Oh, yes, there.
What if they don't necessarily know all of these terms, and they don't feel any certain way, and you're telling them to use whatever words that they would like to describe themselves, but they don't know exactly how to say it?
Yeah, that's tricky. Like if you're maybe talking about a young person who is coming out, and it depends if they want a term or not. If they don't want one, they don't need one. Who needs one? But if they would like a term, I think sometimes it can be really helpful to start meeting some other people in the LGBT community and start figuring out who you can connect with and starting to kind of find your place. Because sometimes it can be incredibly helpful to actually to have that label to put on and to say, yes, that's me. I've been searching for that. And other people maybe don't want that at all. So whenever I speak, I try to use a lot of words like some people will prefer this, others will prefer that. I find it's a very rare instance where you can say everybody or all, because there is so much variation with this gender spectrum. Any other questions at this point? Sure. So this, again, it's individual, and you could ask an individual, but some people who identify as agender will say that they do not have a gender. They do not feel masculine or feminine. They identify with having no gender. And again, there are probably other people that would have a different answer for you. Asking about pronouns, one thing that can be helpful if you're a healthcare provider and you have intake forms is you can have a place on the form that says preferred pronouns and then a blank space, and they can write it in. And you might also get some people who are like, what is that? What are you talking about? And they can leave it blank, or they can ask you. And in person, it can be helpful if you introduce yourself with your pronouns first. That kind of right away gives a cue that you're aware, that you've heard about this, that you're aware that you can't make an assumption about the other person's pronouns, and that it's a safe space where they could tell you theirs. Oh, I could say, hi, my name is Trevor. My pronouns, I use he, his, him. Yeah. And then that kind of opens things up. The other person can respond how they want to, rather than asking a direct question that's like, hey, what are your pronouns? And putting somebody on the spot, right? Those are great questions so far. Any other questions at this point? We now recognize that sexual orientation is distinct from gender identity. Gender identity that we just talked about is your own sense of masculinity or femininity or none of the above. And sexual orientation has to do with who we are attracted to romantically. So a lot of those terms are pretty familiar. I've included two-spirit again there because, once again, it doesn't correlate exactly to any of the LGBT terms, but it's related to them. So so it's up there again. Yeah, pansexual. Some people use that term to describe feeling attracted to someone regardless of their gender or sex. So it doesn't matter where on the gender spectrum or whether they are male or female, they are attracted to people. That's pansexual. I want to go back to two-spirit again for one moment. I wanted to say that although the term started being used in 1990, and it's used in a number of different Aboriginal communities, it refers to a concept that's been around for a long, long time, and so that's one umbrella term that started being used at that time to encapsulate this idea that within Aboriginal communities, two-spirit people have always existed, have always been part of those communities, and now there's a term that crosses the many different languages that are in use as well. Who wants to try to tackle gender expression? Can anyone try to define it or give me an example of a kind of gender expression? It could have to do with the way that you dress. Did you have another idea? Yeah, so the way that you express your gender outwardly to other people. So that could be the way that you dress, like was mentioned. It could be wearing earrings. It could be your hairstyle. And then also it can kind of overlap with some medical and physical aspects of gender, like when you start taking testosterone, for example, like I did, I got facial hair. And that's a very obvious outward clue as to my gender, and it's a part of my gender expression. Also, choosing to bind the breasts or chest, that's using a material to flatten the chest and create a more male-appearing chest. That can be an important part of someone's outward gender expression as well. Sometimes when someone comes out as transgender, someone will respond by saying, oh, they were female and now they are male. But in fact, often more the way that people will describe it is that the gender expression is what's changed. That outward expression of someone's gender has changed. So that person might have felt male all along, but they hadn't told you about it. They hadn't told anybody about it, and now they are. And that's kind of what coming out is all about. Gender dysphoria can be really hard to define, and that term has been kind of changing over time, but it's generally defined these days as a sense of discomfort, often really urgent discomfort, that has to do with the difference between the sex and gender that society sees a person as and how they feel, their inner sense of gender identity, when there is a mismatch there. And so the term cisgender refers to someone who doesn't have a feeling of mismatch. They feel like, yeah, things line up okay. The sex that I was assigned at birth, that matches how I feel, and I'm fine with how people communicate with me and interact with me. The term transgender refers to someone who does experience that mismatch more. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about some history here that's important to understanding the difference between the term transsexual and transgender, and that also has to do with medical diagnosis and eventually with pregnancy and lactation. This is eventually where all of this is going, I promise. I know it seems like a long lead up to that. So in the late 1920s and early 1930s, there were some physicians in Germany who started practicing surgeries to help change the reproductive anatomy. And no one had prescribed hormones like estrogen or testosterone until in 1948, a doctor called Harry Benjamin, who was an American-German doctor. He treated his very first trans patient, who was a child, and he had a really radical approach for that time, because what he did was he prescribed estrogen. And at that time, other doctors disagreed with that approach, and they were treating people who presented as transsexual, they were treating them with things like electroconvulsive therapy or lobotomy or drugged detention. And Harry Benjamin had a different approach. He decided to take what we now call an affirming approach. So when his patients told him that they felt this incongruity between their felt sense of gender, their gender identity, and the way that others saw them based on their sex and their reproductive anatomy, he said, okay, well, maybe we can help to make that match up better for you by changing some of those physical characteristics. So that was a new approach. In the US and in other countries at that time, wearing clothes associated with the opposite sex was often illegal. Castration of a male was also often illegal, and homosexuality was often illegal in many places too. So he was very rare amongst other doctors in what he was doing. Harry Benjamin came up with a scale from 0 to 6 when he was trying in his work and his research. He was trying to figure out who should receive treatment and who should not, and at the 0 side of the scale, he classified people who maybe cross-dressed a little bit, and he thought, well, no, they're not. They don't need treatment. It's frequent and not that important to them. And then at the 6 end of the scale, he called those people true transsexuals, which is a term that nowadays we have a lot of problems with for reasons that I'll describe in a moment. Included in that definition for Harry Benjamin, he included sexual orientation. So he felt that to be defined as a true transsexual deserving of surgery and access to hormones, you also needed to in your transition gender, you needed to be straight as well. And that's another thing that has changed quite a bit since Harry Benjamin's time. He also said that people who were true transsexuals and would qualify for surgery and medical treatment, that they must despise their sex organs. So all of these things to do with being a true transsexual, they don't fit terribly well with pregnancy and lactation. And I think that's a question that a lot of people have when they come to this topic. They say, well, if you're transgender, why would you ever want to be pregnant? Don't you hate your body? Don't you hate those female parts of your body? Why would you want to do that? And I believe some of that comes from where Harry Benjamin started with all that. I mean, what he was doing at the time was incredibly progressive and very, very helpful to a lot of people, but it also kind of gives us this more rigid legacy to do with bodies and how we define them. There are also a number of laws that have been in place for quite a long time to do with sterilization of transgender or transsexual people. And, sorry, Harry Benjamin would have said transsexual. Now people use kind of a more flexible umbrella term, transgender. So that's the difference there between those two terms. So the Canadian provinces and U.S. states, they have been kind of changing legal requirements for legal recognition of gender identity, sort of been changing things one state and one province at a time. In Europe, many countries actually specified sterilization, not just sex reassignment surgery, but sterilization. For example, in Sweden, this was a requirement up until 2012. If somebody wanted to have their gender identity recognized and changed on their ID and their documents, they needed to be sterilized. And the requirement was specifically sterilization, not necessarily hysterectomy, but sterilization. And this came from a set of laws that were called unfit to breed people. So those included people with an illness or a physical disability, with a mental illness, or having an antisocial lifestyle, and also transgender people. Up until 1976, all of those people could be forcibly sterilized. And from 1976 until 2012, the law remained on the books just for transgender people who wanted to get those correctly matching identification documents. Holland, Denmark, and Germany made similar changes around the same time. And then in April of 2017, the European Court of Human Rights found that the sterilization requirement in legal gender recognition actually violates human rights. So now many countries are being required to change those laws. Are there any questions at this point? Not so far. Okay. So we have come a long way from this model of true transsexuality and being deserving of medical care. And now many clinics are moving to a different approach to having an informed consent model of care where patients have a lot more choice about how they transition and if they transition and getting access to medical aspects of transition. And I think part of the reason for this is that when people experience gender dysphoria, what they tend to report is a wide variety of experiences. And that's part of why Harry Benjamin's original model has fallen apart at this point. In the research study that I did, I'll mention that briefly. We had 22 study participants that I interviewed, and they all identified as transmasculine, and they all had experienced pregnancy. And they described a wide variety of experiences with gender dysphoria. So for some study participants, they talked about hormonal dysphoria, that they could really feel the difference when they stopped taking testosterone to become pregnant, and that was a cause of gender dysphoria for them. For other study participants, the genitals were much more a source or a trigger of gender dysphoria, or having physical exams that involved those body parts. That was particularly difficult. Other study participants described intense gender dysphoria to do with the breasts or the chest. particularly around nursing a baby. So for some people, that was much more intense than the first two items that I mentioned. And for others, nursing a baby did not bring up gender dysphoria at all. Even though they identified as transmasculine, that just wasn't a source of gender dysphoria. They described really the utility of being able to breastfeed or chest feed a baby, and that finally that body part was useful to them. And so that was one time they actually did not experience gender dysphoria to do with having breasts. Several study participants also described intense gender dysphoria coming back after they weaned their babies. So when they were nursing their babies, they didn't have that experience. They just felt like their bodies were being useful, and that was fantastic. And then after they weaned their babies, the gender dysphoria came back, was intense, and they eventually opted to have male chest contouring surgery. And for other study participants, they talked about social gender dysphoria, or socially triggered gender dysphoria, that they were okay with being pregnant, they were okay with some of those body changes, but when those body changes led to their gender expression being a little different, which led to others in the community identifying them differently, calling them a mother or using the wrong pronouns for them, that led to feelings of gender dysphoria. So it's a little more complex than yes, you're transgender and you need all the surgeries and all the hormones, or no, you're not. And that's where pregnancy and lactation fits in here.
Have all those participants had top surgery prior to becoming pregnant?
No, not all of them. Some of them had and some of them hadn't, and they had different types of top surgery as well. There are a few different surgical techniques used for top surgery. So. Yes, sorry, I should repeat that term. There are a few different terms that people use to describe male chest contouring surgery, and top surgery is also one of them. Top as in the top half of your body. Any other questions at this point? I don't want to leave anybody behind anywhere. Okay. Sometimes it is. Sorry, maybe people didn't hear in the back. The question was, is lactation possible having had male chest contouring surgery? And yes, sometimes it is. I actually did produce some milk for my children, although I used a supplementer as well because I didn't have a full milk supply. But it can depend a bit on the surgical technique that's used. I had a type of surgery where the incision goes around the areolae and then chest tissue is removed. And so for me, some milk ducts and some nerves were left intact during that surgery. In other surgeries, the nipples are actually removed entirely and then repositioned on the chest. And with those surgeries, nobody has done a thorough enough study with enough participants to really draw great conclusions of any kind. But I think common sense would tell us that more milk ducts and nerves, or probably all of them, would be severed, and then you might have recanalization of milk ducts, or you might not. Some of those nerves might reconnect, or they might not. But in our research study, there were a couple of study participants who had that type of surgery with nipple grafts. Nipples had been removed during the surgery and then repositioned on the chest, and they did experience engorgement after the birth. And at least one of them did produce milk as well. So. Yes, go ahead. Yeah, chest feeding is a preferred term. I'm going to get out of order here, which is totally fine. I don't mind at all. I love it when questions just come up when they do, but don't mind the screen if things kind of get out of order. So chest feeding is a term that some trans people have started to use instead of breastfeeding. And there's no difference. It's feeding a baby from your body. That's what it refers to. And it just has to do with an individual's preference. Actually, all of the 22 study participants, when we asked what term do they prefer to use to refer to this part of their body, they all said chest. Nobody said breasts. But when we asked what term do you prefer to use to refer to feeding your baby from your body, we got a variety of responses. Some people said breastfeeding. Some people said chest feeding. Some said nursing. Others just said feeding. Does that answer your question? Okay. Where did I get to? Got distracted by what we just talked about. Right. So, talking about different ways to transition relates to all the different types of gender dysphoria that people experience. When we talk about transition, it's not necessarily a linear journey that goes from point A to point B and then you're done. Although people still use that kind of language a lot, including my own physician, that can be difficult. And he says, "So, are we done here?" And I at first I had no idea what he was talking about. He was a bit confused that I had kids and had stopped taking testosterone, and having had chest surgery, that was fine for me, and that was good. And he wanted to know, well, do you need more surgeries to make that alignment happen? But he didn't ask it in maybe in the most sensitive way. So transition can have to do with a combination of all these things and whatever an individual chooses. A lot of those we've talked about a little bit already. Many people opt for a legal name change, and then depending on where you're living, you may or may not be able to get your gender marker on your ID to match that. So I now live in the province of Manitoba, but I was born in British Columbia in Canada. So to get my Manitoba driver's license to have an M for male on it, I would need to get a new birth certificate from British Columbia. And at the time that I changed my name legally, I couldn't get a different gender marker without having a hysterectomy. That would have been required. So right now, I still have a passport that says F on it, and every time I get on an airplane, I think like, oh, is some security person or a customs person going to be upset that this doesn't quite line up? But so far, fingers crossed. Is there any wood anywhere in this building? I think it might all be plastic. Oh, over there. Okay, I will knock on the wood. I hope this is real wood. So far, I haven't had any problems with being able to travel. And now, since that time, the law in British Columbia has changed. So next time that I have to renew my passport, I'm going to do all the massive paperwork and get it all to line up. Another term that's really important for our conversation today is intersectionality. Who is familiar with that term already? Wow, a lot of you. That's awesome. Does anybody want to try to define it and be all participatory and everything? Okay, sure.
Intersectionality means, I think, that we recognize that each sort of subculture identity has also its own subcultures and identities. So being an advocate for an African-American bisexual woman would be.
I feel like I should give you a microphone. Or do you want to come up here? I don't know if the people at the back would be able to hear. Are you scared of the microphone a little bit? Okay. Sorry, keep going.
No, I was done.
Okay. I don't know how much people at the back could hear. I'm sorry. Okay. All right. That's okay. I'll still define it for the group. So the term itself was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, but the concept has been around for a lot longer than that. And as our wonderful volunteer at the front mentioned just a moment ago, it has to do with recognizing that when you belong to more than one marginalized group, sometimes the combination of those identities, it can compound oppression that you might experience. When Kimberly Crenshaw was first writing about this, she tended to focus on the intersection of sex, race, and class. So, for example, if you are a black woman, your experience in the world will be different, and particularly your experience of oppression being both female and black will be different from your experience if you are a white woman who has the experience of white privilege. Since Kimberly Crenshaw wrote about this, other scholars have kind of expanded the concept of intersectionality to also include disability and ethnicity, immigration status, sexual orientation, gender identity, age, and endless others. Another important one for us in this room is the identity of being a patient. In our research study, there were a number of examples where intersectionality came up either directly or indirectly. One of them was a study participant who described having a partner who was blind. And so when the couple went to birthing classes, they needed the instructor to recognize that the gender identity of the birthing parent was male, and he wanted to be included in the conversations and in the language being used. And also, their partner needed some accommodation, being a visually impaired person. And the study participant described that it was just utterly overwhelming for the class instructor. They couldn't do it. They couldn't handle it, and the kind of the combination of those two things was too much for them. And so that couple didn't feel very well included in the class that they were taking. It was hard for them to access the resources that were being presented. So this is something that I mention in every talk that I give, that it's important to recognize not only gender identity and not to just be hyper focused on that, but the way that it intersects with other identities as well. There was another example from our research study of someone who had a hard time getting their healthcare provider to focus on other things, not to do with their gender identity. They said at one point that they were fearful of going to the hospital, and the midwife said, "Oh, right, because you're trans. I can imagine how hard that would be." And they just launched off into a big discussion about it. And meanwhile, the patient said, "No, that's not what my fear has to do with." And it was hard for them to get a word in edgewise. So what can we do? I think it's really helpful to focus on being affirming rather than necessarily being correct. I speak with a lot of people who have a hang-up, for instance, over using pronouns they, them, and their for a single person. They say, well, those are plural. I can't possibly use those. Yet there are individuals who prefer those pronouns because they identify as non-binary. They don't identify as masculine or as feminine. They identify as non-binary, and their chosen pronouns are they, them, and their. And for me, I think communicating with people, working with people, especially working with patients or clients, being affirming is so much more important than being grammatically correct, and that's what I try to remember. Also, those words are now being recognized in dictionaries as correct, so So we can update the way that we are speaking and recognize that those changes are being made. Use requested pronouns. Sometimes people will try to, they'll talk about someone's real pronouns or real name. And all of that is disrespectful to what the person has told you about what their name is now, the pronouns that they're using now. Sure, go ahead.
So if you had, let's say, a trans client who had delivered their baby, or if you had, let's say, a lesbian couple that had a baby, I could see it being totally wrong to say who's the mother, or like, oh, there's the mother, because you were saying earlier about how the mother wouldn't necessarily work for everybody, and they might feel wrong about, like, that it does not speak to them. So how would you go around that?
I think intake forms are really helpful for this. If you use intake forms in the kind of work that you do, you can have some open-ended questions, or instead of having a space for mother that defines the person as mother, you can put down parent instead, or you can put mother/parent or birthing person. You can kind of get creative, and you can also have open-ended questions. And if that's not possible, I don't know when it wouldn't be possible. Healthcare providers chart stuff like a lot. Sure, go ahead.
So I am a supervisor for a program that goes into hospital rooms
Right.
after they deliver, and we recruit them for our program. So sometimes we couldn't have an intake form directly walking into a room, and their providers might not even think that that's important to ask how they would be spoken to.
Right. Yeah. If you just don't know, and there's no opportunity to collect that information on an intake form, you can subtly change your language. If maybe you would walk in and say, "How's the mom doing?" You could walk in and say, "How's everybody doing?" Just have a slight change like that, and then hopefully in the next sentence, in the response, you'll get a clue. Because of course, if somebody is incredibly excited and proud and happy that they are a new mother, then that's the word that you're going to want to be using, right? That's really important too. Sure.
I work with several clients, and I like to ask, but it's after I spent time with them. And I've been working with a couple, gosh, for almost 2 years, and we've just become friends because we like each other so much. But in the early days, when we lost that baby, I didn't know who was going to be called. And finally, I looked at her and I said, I know you're calling yourself mom, and I'm just curious what you guys prefer. What do you guys call each other to the baby? And she had a lovely story to share about how we decided to call our wife Amma because the baby started saying that. Like, they had no idea what they wanted to call each other, and so it kind of progressed in our family. So I always say, when in doubt, don't be an ass and ask. And it ends up being most of the time good stories. So if you go in really humbly, you're likely to get a good story versus, hey, what do you want to be called? It's a little bit rude, but then you can kind of get after it.
Right. Yeah. So it depends on your relationship and the context, and a lot of factors there as well. For sure. There's a little one here that lots of people trip over, and that is the word transgender doesn't ever need an ED to be added to it. And a good way to remember it is that you would say it the same. It'll line up the same way that lesbian and gay do. You wouldn't say that somebody is gayed or lesbianed, and you don't need to say that somebody is transgendered. And also that you can say so-and-so is transgender, not so-and-so is a transgender. And again, you can remember it by thinking, would you say someone is a gay? No, you wouldn't, right? Okay, so hopefully Hopefully that's okay to remember. We already, I think, talked about the words chest feeding, breastfeeding, and nursing. This is a big one. People are going to make mistakes, especially when you're so used to, maybe for the last 30 or 40 years, you've been talking about mothers and women, and then you have a client who says, I'm transgender, and I want you to use he, him, and his pronouns for me. And you make a mistake, just apologize and move on. The moving on part is critical here. I had a dentist once who is not my dentist now. I had one visit with her and then didn't go back. Because among other things, she made one mistake. I think because I was holding my infant, she called me mom, because she's so used to that if somebody's holding a young baby, they must be a mother, I suppose. I mean, I hope that also dads and male-identified parents that we see them involved with their kids, and that it would be okay for them to be holding babies as well. But she just saw the child in my arms and called me a mom. And then when I said, oh, actually, I'm dad, she apologized and apologized and apologized and just kept going and going, and she became more and more awkward, and it was a disaster for everyone. Some of this we've also talked about a little bit along the way. I think it's very helpful to prepare when you can, so that before you maybe have your first transgender client that you're working with, that you've taken a look at your intake forms from that perspective and made some changes if you can, as well as handouts that you give out. And that's the sort of thing that we're going to look at in a lot more detail in the workshop tomorrow, if anybody's able to come to that. Another really incredibly helpful and great thing to do is to talk with your colleagues about some of this stuff and to try to gently educate some colleagues. It's amazing that you were able to be here today, but I know that you're all going back to clinics and hospitals with other healthcare providers who weren't able to be here. And so if you can help to share some of this information, I think that will help everyone. You can also create some cues that show that you are welcoming to LGBT clients. And those can be an item on an intake form, like having a space for preferred pronoun. To me, that's a cue that you're aware of these issues and that you're welcoming. Or to have something very simple, like a rainbow sticker on your door. That's a pretty universal sign as well. And do we have any time for questions? 2 minutes, okay. Sure, go ahead.
So I knew what the Q was, but what's the I and the A?
Oh, okay. What is the I, the A, and the plus? Yeah, we would have to. I is for intersex. A is asexual or agender, and plus is because there are so many other terms that we just run out of space for them all. Sure, go ahead. So this question is about parents who would like their babies to be referred to as they, them, or their. I don't think it's very common. I've also heard about it before. And for me, the reason for that goes back to when a baby's sex is assigned at birth. The reason that we use that language, assigned at birth, is that sometimes when somebody has an intersex condition, you can't see it, like the Olympic athletes that we talked about earlier, who did not find out until much later in life that they had those conditions. So I think part of that is to bring awareness to the fact that you can't necessarily assume, you can't know for sure. So I believe that's what those parents are doing, and that they want their baby to be able to tell others when they know how they identify. Because I think everybody eventually does. People know as they grow up. And in fact, this hopefully doesn't happen so much today, but in the past, I'm being told to stop. Okay, 30 seconds. Many intersex babies who were obviously intersex as birth, doctors tried to perform surgeries to make them look right at birth, but not actually knowing how they would identify, because you can't know until someone's grown up enough to be able to tell you. And sometimes they made a mistake and performed the wrong type of surgery, and those cases are really tragic and difficult. Okay, I hope that answers that question somewhat. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming.